In a decision that will reverberate through global commerce, the Supreme Court has struck down key tariffs imposed under President Trump. The 6-3 ruling dismantles a trade framework that shaped U.S. economic strategy for nearly a decade. This decision redefines the limits of executive power in international trade and signals a major shift in how America engages with the world. The ruling ends the America First trade agenda, which used tariffs to reshape supply chains and protect domestic industries. Tariffs on steel, aluminum, and Chinese goods sparked global retaliation and uncertainty for U.S. businesses. Now, policymakers and corporations must adapt to a rapidly changing economic landscape. The implications are vast. Consumers may see price changes, manufacturers face new pressures, and farmers could regain access to overseas markets. The court's judgment is more than legal. It's an economic event that will be felt for years. The legal debate centered on whether the executive overstepped by using national security to justify broad tariffs. The court said yes. This reasserts Congress's primary role in regulating foreign commerce. As the nation digests this historic verdict, attention shifts from the courtroom to the marketplace. The world is watching as the U.S. redefines its role in the global economy. To grasp the Supreme Court's decision, we must examine the legal tools behind the tariffs. The Trump administration relied on Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962, allowing tariffs if imports threaten national security. This rarely used law justified sweeping tariffs on steel and aluminum, even from close allies. The rationale: a strong domestic metals industry is vital for defense. Investigations found such a threat, paving the way for tariffs in 2018. The goal was to boost U.S. producers and secure supply chains. The second tool was Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974, empowering the U.S. Trade Representative to counter unfair foreign trade practices. Section 301 targeted China for intellectual property theft and forced technology transfers. The U.S. imposed tariffs on hundreds of billions in Chinese goods, aiming to pressure Beijing to change its practices. Unlike Section 232, these tariffs were China-specific and covered a vast range of products. The intent was leverage, not blanket protectionism. Together, Sections 232 and 301 became the pillars of a trade policy that transformed America's global relationships. These statutes set the stage for the legal and economic battles that followed. The Supreme Court's ruling now forces a fundamental rethink of these tools. From the start, the tariffs ignited fierce debate. Some U.S. steel and aluminum producers cheered, but most manufacturers relying on these metals saw costs soar. Studies showed that while protected industries gained, downstream users faced higher costs, leading to a net negative impact on U.S. manufacturing and jobs. Revived steel mills were touted as successes, but job losses in metal-using sectors far outnumbered gains. Retaliation was swift. The EU, Canada, and Mexico imposed counter-tariffs, hitting iconic American goods and especially hurting U.S. farmers. China, the main target, responded with tariffs on American exports like soybeans and pork, inflicting pain on Midwest farmers. The national security justification for the tariffs drew global criticism, with many arguing it misused Section 232 and undermined the rules-based trading system. The World Trade Organization was flooded with challenges to the U.S. tariffs. The U.S. found itself isolated, in conflict not just with China but with key allies. The policy's legacy: economic disruption, strained alliances, and a divided business community. The controversy set the stage for the legal showdown that would reach the Supreme Court. The debate over the tariffs became a debate over America's place in the global economy. The costs and benefits were never clear-cut. The fallout continues to shape U.S. trade policy. The Supreme Court's decision now closes this contentious chapter. The Supreme Court case wasn't about the tariffs' economic impact, but about constitutional authority. Plaintiffs argued Section 232 gave the president legislative power that belongs to Congress. The majority agreed. The law's vague standards let the president act as a lawmaker, violating the separation of powers. The ruling draws a line. Broad economic duties are Congress's domain, not the executive's. Despite dissenting warnings about limiting presidential flexibility, the decision reasserts congressional control over trade. The tariff's impact is clear in the data. U.S. steel and aluminum imports from targeted countries plummeted, but overall imports shifted to nations exempt from tariffs, a phenomenon called trade diversion. Section 301 tariffs on China caused U.S. imports from China to drop sharply. while imports from Vietnam, Taiwan, and Malaysia surged. American companies moved supply chains out of China, redrawing the global manufacturing map. For China, this meant losing its top customer. For countries like Vietnam and Mexico, it was an economic windfall. These changes are hard to reverse. Billions have been invested in new factories and logistics. Retaliatory tariffs hit U.S. agriculture hard. Soybean exports to China fell over 70%, forcing government aid to farmers. The trade war left lasting scars on multiple sectors. The data tells a story of unintended consequences and global realignment. The tariffs didn't just penalize China, they reshaped global supply chains. The economic battlefield is now permanently altered. The Supreme Court's ruling will further shift these dynamics. The Supreme Court's decision is already rippling through the economy. Manufacturers relying on imports see immediate cost relief, potentially halting price hikes and even lowering prices for consumers. Domestic steel and aluminum producers, once protected, now face tough global competition and possible layoffs. For consumers, the end of tariffs could mean lower prices on everything from electronics to furniture. The tariffs acted as a hidden tax, passed on to buyers. In the long run, businesses are unlikely to return to old supply chains. Diversification remains a priority. The ruling removes a major cost but leaves lasting lessons about risk and resilience. The new era demands strategic adaptation from both businesses and consumers. U.S. allies welcomed the Supreme Court's ruling as a win for fair trade. The EU, Canada, and Japan praised the decision and are expected to lift retaliatory tariffs, benefiting U.S. exporters. European and Japanese industries regained tariff-free access to the U.S. market, boosting their exports and jobs. China's response was cautious, noting unresolved tensions over technology and market access. The ruling removes a major friction point but doesn't end U.S.-China competition. The decision also eases tensions with the World Trade Organization, opening the door for renewed multilateral cooperation. The global trade landscape is shifting, with alliances and strategies being recalibrated. Economists are divided on the ruling's impact. Dr. Evelyn Reed argues the tariffs were a regressive tax. Their removal acts as a broad tax cut and should boost growth and ease inflation. Dr. Mark Theron warns that ending tariff protection could cost high-wage manufacturing jobs and increase reliance on foreign suppliers. Most experts agree tariffs distort markets and reduce efficiency. The Congressional Budget Office found tariffs lowered real U.S. income by forcing inefficient sourcing. Removing them should allow capital and labor to flow more productively, enhancing long-term growth. The key challenge: developing a smarter, targeted trade strategy, especially regarding China. Policymakers must now work with allies and invest in domestic competitiveness. Simply reverting to pre-tariff policies isn't enough. The focus now shifts to building a resilient, forward-looking trade policy. The Supreme Court's decision marks a turning point in U.S. economic history. By curbing executive power, the court ends a decade of aggressive protectionism and reasserts Congress's role in trade. The tariffs' legacy disrupted supply chains, strained alliances, and higher costs for businesses and consumers. Allies welcome the ruling. China remains cautious. The data shows economic disruption and a net negative impact on U.S. manufacturing. The ruling closes one chapter but leaves the next unwritten, forcing a new national conversation on America's economic future. The world now waits to see what a collaborative 21st century U.S. trade policy will look like.